If you'd like to open your Bibles to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. We'll actually start in a couple of John's writings, but we'll spend most of our time in Mark 14 and 15. Kyle, I'm assuming the love theme was intentional, but if it wasn't, I hope you noticed the love of Jesus and the love of God that was going throughout all those songs. What heights of love, what depths of peace, how deep the Father's love. It was all over, which is kind of interesting because that was the theme I chose to go with for what we're going to look at today. How much we see the love of God and the love of Christ in these chapters as we look at Mark 14 and 15. Beginning, though, in 1 John, John writes this: "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us." And if you remember, we found Jesus in the garden praying for another way, but understanding that he was going to be obedient to what happens through here at the end of the gospel. And whatever he may have been feeling in the midst of that, I think we have a hard time attributing fear to Jesus sometimes, but I think there is a human piece of what was going to be coming that'd be hard not to feel just a little bit of that. But love overcomes that. And then in John's Gospel, John chapter 15, verse 9, Jesus says, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." So if we're to abide in his love, if we're to love the way that God loved him, if we're to love and understand the way that Jesus loved, the question that comes to mind for me at least is, what does the love of Jesus look like? And I think we can look throughout the New Testament and see a lot of different examples of that. I think we find times that we've seen here in the Gospel of Mark where he has performed a miracle of one kind or another, where he has made physical contact with a leper, where you could avoid lepers in that day and time. You would probably, even if you wanted to heal a leper, you might not want to make contact. You might want to do it from a distance. He has helped people who were followers and people who were not. He has helped people that if we were to try to decide, are these people deserving or are they not deserving? And we might categorize those people somehow. He has helped people that we would think of as very deserving, and other people that we thought, you really shouldn't waste your time with that guy. That's not the person you need to help. He has seen people that others have not seen. He has shown compassion at times where it's difficult to have compassion. He has shown love for people who were disagreeable and who were full of themselves, and on it goes. But I think of all the examples of love that we see from Jesus in the New Testament, it really culminates in what happens here in these chapters. So the love of Jesus, I think we can see very truly here in Mark chapter 14 and 15. Mark 14, we'll start in verse 53, kind of where we left off from last time. Jesus has been arrested in the garden. He's been betrayed. His followers have kind of run, or maybe some watching from a distance. It says that they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and elders and the scribes came together. You ever found yourself in one of those high-pressure kind of meetings where it's a lot of people who have a lot more authority, and you kind of there at their mercy of what they're going to do, and you feel just kind of helpless in the midst of it? I don't want us to mistake Jesus for that feeling, because Jesus is not helpless in the midst of this. At any moment in any of this, he could have decided, okay, this is enough, and I'm going to take control here and do what I can do. But he, throughout all of this, kind of keeps going along through the process that God has planned for him. Verse 54, it says that Peter followed him from a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. We don't encounter a whole lot of people that are like this in life, where if you were to try to find someone who had something to say about them that were true and against them, for most people that would be easy to find, wouldn't it? I try to do my best, but I'm going to guess you could find someone that could tell you about a time that I've fallen short. I used to, when I was a youth minister, I would ask the question this way: if I were to come in and tell you about a scandal, and I would attach someone's name to it, whose name would I attach to it that you would never believe it, even though normally you'd believe me? And most of them had somebody in mind that and maybe you do too. If I would ask you the same question, there'd be somebody that you would think, I could never believe it of this person. They were trying to find something about Jesus, and they couldn't find anything. verse 56 and 57, it says, "For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, 'We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Yet even about this their testimony did not agree." And throughout the Gospels, when we find people talking about the things that Jesus has actually done, we find a lot of agreement. I always think in my mind of John 9, one of my favorite chapters, where he heals the blind man, and they keep asking the blind man questions about what happened, and he keeps saying basically the same thing, and the story agrees, and it agrees, and it agrees. But for these people, there is no agreement in their stories. They're there to just say what they can to try to get Jesus convicted. Verse 60 says, "The high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?'" Jesus, his love, is truth in the face of lies. All around him, there are these lies about who he is and what he is doing that aren't really who Jesus is. If they wanted to come in and give testimony about him, think about, as we've gone through the book of Mark since Christmas time, think about what you have seen. You have seen this Lamb of God that has come into the world. You have seen one who has encountered all of these people and taught them in ways that they're astounded by. You've seen the miracles. You've heard the teaching. You've seen this consistency of love in him. And if you were to testify to who is this Jesus, those would be the things that you would say. And yet, all of this false testimony comes before them, leading all the way up to the top. And even in the midst of those lies, where most of us would want to lash out and say, "That's not true. What you're saying is untrue. Let me tell you about who I really am and what I've really done." Jesus is just content to know that he is truth in the midst of them, and the lies are just, they don't matter. But he remained silent and made no answer. Verse 61. "And the high priest again asked him, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?' And Jesus said, 'I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven.' And the high priest tore his garments and said, 'What further witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?' And they all condemned him as deserving death." The love of Jesus is humility instead of arrogance. Who has the power in that room? Is it the people who have arrested him and bound him and brought him in there? Is it the religious leaders and the high priests who are there just feeling like they can cast judgment on him? Or is it the one who literally has just introduced himself as "I am"? He is God standing in their midst. Who has the power there? And yet you see the arrogance from them and the humility from him. It's tough, isn't it? It's tough, especially when you're in a position of power, where you're in a place where you can have your way and do what it is that you want, to instead show humility in the midst of that. For these high priests, what it really comes down to is their power is threatened in so many ways, whether it's in Jesus' teaching, whether it's in the fact that just earlier in this week, he has come in and he has flipped over the tables of the money changers in the temple, which the high priest was getting a cut of. In any way that they could think of, they were threatened by him, and their arrogance says, "We are more important than you are." And even though Jesus knows that it's the opposite of that, he humbly stands there and takes their judgment. In verse 65, it says, "Some began to spit on him and cover his face and strike him, saying to him, 'Prophesy.' And the guards received him with blows." The love of Jesus is calm when you are faced with insults. For Jesus, he could lash out at any of this. He could be done with this at any point in time. And yet he remains calm in the midst of this. He does not deserve the insults that are coming his way. He does not deserve to be struck. And yet he takes this as part of the Father's plan. And when Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You were with the Nazarene. You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And if we continue through this section here, we find Peter, again, just getting a little more intense and a little more elevated with each denial that he makes, denying him 3 times, just as Jesus has told him previously that he would. And just as he has said, "I will never do that. I will never deny you." And yet Peter goes on and does that. The love of Jesus looks like forgiveness after failure. Now, if you know the story, you know that Peter is going to go out and weep bitterly after he denies him the third time, and you know it's going to seem as if Peter has failed in every metric that we could think of, and yet when we find the book of Acts, Peter is one who is leading the church. Peter is one who preaches that sermon on the day of Pentecost. Peter is one who, at the end of the book of John, Jesus, the way it's usually titled in a section is something like Jesus reinstates Peter, as if he needed reinstating, I guess. But Jesus has this moment with Peter where he asks him if he loves him 3 times, and Peter affirms 3 times that he loves Jesus. Jesus is not done with him. As so many would at this point, after this denial 3 times, be ready to just move on to somebody else, Jesus instead forgives. For us, we can learn so much from the love of Jesus in so many ways, but maybe this is one of the big ones. How many times have you been let down by somebody and you just think to yourself, okay, enough. I've had enough of that. And yet the love of Jesus is the kind of love that forgives in the face of failure, which is good for us to remember as people who love, but also good for us to remember as people who failed a lot of times, that Jesus forgives us as well. And then as soon as it was morning, chapter 15 and verse 1, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Butch led us through that story during the communion talk just a few minutes ago, but he is brought before now this kind of worldly authority, one that is not going to be theoretically in agreement the way the chief priest should have been, but one who is a Roman, one who is kind of from the outside, but still has authority here, who questions him and doesn't really get a whole lot of answers out of him. And then at the end of that section, in verse 15, it says that Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. There are so many little details in the Gospels that I love when I run across them. What has the story of God been about to this point? What does God do over and over again with his people? And what does Jesus come into the world to do but deliver? And yet here Mark throws this word in that Jesus is going to be delivered. Can anyone deliver God anywhere? Another way to translate this word might be to send. Can anyone send God anywhere? That doesn't work, does it? And yet Jesus goes. Even though Pilate really has no real power over him, Jesus goes out of his love because the love of God, the love of Jesus, is putting others first. Jesus could at any moment in this be done, and yet he understands that God has something else in mind through this plan. And he is going to put others before himself, regardless of what it is that he might prefer to do. Verse 16, it says, the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. I don't know how many of you have been mocked at some point in life. It is not an enjoyable thing by any means. It's a very demeaning moment. It is something that you just feel like you want to escape and be anywhere else. You don't want to be seen. For the Son of God to go through this, and for all of these people who he was part of creating, for all of these people who would have nothing that they have without the power of God, to mock him and to beat him, and he just continued to take it all from them. And then they led him out. And again, if you can't send God, you also can't really lead God. They led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to gather his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. Just a minor little detail here, by the way. Simon of Cyrene, who is the father of Alexander and Rufus, which would mean not a whole lot to any of us, but to Mark's readers, there's a connection that is here. And most commentators will tell you that this is because maybe these people have become followers somewhere along the way and will be familiar names. This is a life-changing thing for all of these people as they encounter Jesus. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him, and the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. I think so often we take the mocking as that thing that happens before he's crucified and as he's being beaten. It just continues on, doesn't it? That he is just mocked by every person that he encounters. Love, the way that Jesus loves, is patience as the object of mockery. Our tendency is to want to strike back. Our tendency is to want to get ours. And yet Jesus, in all of these moments, just takes this mockery. And it's not even that he doesn't get down off the cross and show them. It's not even that he doesn't just start striking people down because he could. It's not even, he doesn't even say anything. He just stays there and takes all of this mockery from all of them. When the 6th hour came, verse 33, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. The love of Jesus is sacrificial. He is willing to give everything there is to give, not just part of himself, but all of himself. How deep the Father's love for us. He gives more than anyone could possibly give. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The love of Jesus is the greatest love, because there is no one who would write this story because it doesn't make sense. The idea that God would come and give himself for us, that he would send his Son to go through this kind of death, this mockery, all that he went through for us, it is a sacrificial love that is the greatest love that we could possibly imagine. John continues from where we read at the beginning. In John 15, verses 12 and 13, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." Greater love has no one than this, than someone lay down his life for his friends. And I agree, and yet at the same time, I see something that seems a little greater here. Because there are people who Jesus is before who really don't seem like friends, do they? And yet for Jesus, they are. They are people who he loves, desires to have a relationship with. The love of Jesus is the kind of love that shows us how we are to love. And that's a pretty tall order, because it's one thing to say, "I love you." It's another thing to love this way. This is how we are to love, is the way that he did, sacrificing himself for others, putting himself beneath others, laying his rights down, being able to be silent at times where others are going to lash out and strike back, realizing that God placed us here to love others the way that he loves us. This morning, if you have not felt love like that in your life, you are probably not alone. There are a lot of people within our world that never experience love the way that Jesus loved, but they could. They could from us as people who have been called to love that way, but they also have the love of Jesus that is offered there for them. This morning, if you have never felt that love, you can be baptized into him. Your life can be changed from this moment on, and you can experience a love like you cannot possibly imagine. Or if you have known that love, and for whatever reason you have walked away, you think of those disciples who are watching from a distance, or people who would leave him because of how difficult it was, any number of things that could take us away from God, know that he wants you back. Know that he knew that of you before he went to the cross and still did that for you. If there's some way we can help you this morning to grow closer to him, to love like he does, to experience his love in your life, please come while we stand and sing.